Imagine having your dream job and making hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars doing it. You probably wouldn't risk losing all that just to make more money, right? Well, there's been a good amount of pro athletes who've risked their career for gambling. So I'm gonna answer the question on why pro athletes risk their career gambling, and I'll also tell you 3 of the biggest gambling scandals in sports history. It's 1:30 a.m. on a rainy night outside Penn Station in New York in February 1951. There are some detectives there, anticipating for when the train from Philadelphia will arrive. Their mission? Arrest 3 basketball players on the City College of New York team. In the 1940s, CCNY was the talk of the town in New York. There were more fans that went to their game than the New York Knicks, and they were so big that they even kicked the Knicks out of their home arena, Madison Square Garden. At the same time, there were thousands of illegal gambling operators in New York, betting disgusting amounts of money on every game and even in the stadium itself. Harry Gross was a big contributor to this. He did a lot of illegal gambling and he made millions. And to protect him and his group from getting in trouble, he would bribe police officers and politicians. In the 1949-1950 season, CCNY met with gamblers for the first time at an out-of-city hotel that a lot of the players worked at. They had bets on basketball games, and gamblers started telling players that they would get half the money if they helped their score prediction come true. This didn't happen for all the games, and only a few players agreed to the deal, but those who agreed started shaving points. Now, point shaving is when you purposely score less points, but you still try and win the game. And CCNY did so well that year that they got invited to the top tournament, the NIT. But prior to the game, gamblers went up to Norm Major, one of CCNY's players, and said he would double the normal amount of money and give each player $2,000. Norm was going to ask his teammates, but he decided not to because of how big of a deal this tournament was. In the first round, CCNY bet USF. The quarterfinals, they were up against the favorite team, University of Kentucky, but they somehow dominated 89-50. They went to the semifinals and dominated again, and in the finals, they played against Bradley University and won the championship. At the same time in Brooklyn, there's an investigation taking place on police officers taking bribes from gamblers. So 29 rookie policemen went undercover as college students in New York, and they ended up catching a lot of gamblers this way. But still, nothing was discovered about any athletes gambling. In January 1951, Junius Kellogg, a Manhattan College basketball player, got an offer from some gamblers. Initially, he agreed, but then he went to tell his coach about the situation. The coach then notified a lawyer. The police wired a former basketball player's phone who went undercover, disguised as a middleman working with the gamblers and the players, and multiple players got caught. So late one rainy night in February 1951, the CCNY basketball team took a train back from a game in Philadelphia. But little did they know there would be detectives waiting for them at Penn Station. As the train pulls in and they walk out, the detectives apprehended 3 players and took them for interrogation. They were put in different rooms and they couldn't contact a lawyer or even their parents. They were questioned for hours until they confessed, then they were arrested. After that, 4 others and eventually 29 other college players got arrested. And this wasn't just the problem at CCNY. Multiple schools had players involved, including big schools like Kentucky. Altogether, 32 athletes admitted to point shaving. The big gambler Harry Gross was placed behind bars for 8 years after being charged 66 times for bribery and gambling, and the CCNY basketball program went downhill from there. They got kicked out of Madison Square Garden, and they went from making history for being the first ever basketball team to win an NCAA and NIT tournaments to all the way to falling to Division III. Now, these players who got arrested, they seemed like regular college athletes, but the choices they made their lives take a turn for the worse. But are there any predictors for which athletes are more likely to gamble? Well, there's actually a study done in Ireland on 608 elite Irish athletes to find predictors of gambling. It was an anonymous questionnaire, and the results found high-risk gamblers were usually men, had no post-secondary education, gambled with their teammates, used free gambling sites, and often gambled for the first time under age 18. Now, this next gambling story could also be an example of a problem gambler. Former MLB All-Star Pete Rose was one of the greatest baseball players of the 20th century, but his career was put in jeopardy on February 1989 when the MLB commissioner requested to meet with Pete to discuss his gambling habits. And Pete was pretty well known for gambling, and there's even rumors going around that said he was betting on MLB games. Real quick, I want to address, if this video seems a little bit different from my usual videos, this video I actually made for a school project, so if you like this style of video where there's a bit more, I guess, educational stuff in it, drop a comment down below. In 1984, Pete started betting on games for his team, the Reds, to win. But in April 1989, gambling receipts were found with Pete's personal info on it by the IRS. And the report the next day claimed that he bet $8,000 to $10,000 on MLB games daily. In May, MLB investigated, and a report called the Dowd Report, which is 225 pages long, was given to the MLB commissioner. And in that report, it said he bet on 52 games in 1987. In late August 1989, Rose signed an agreement and he was banned for life from the MLB, but there was an option to appeal in 1 year. But still, Pete made no confessions, and next year in 1990, he was accused of tax fraud and he was arrested and sent to jail for 5 months. The next year in 1991, things didn't get much better, as he was banned from ever entering the MLB Hall of Fame, but he claimed for years that he wasn't betting on the games he was playing in. Until in 2004, he wrote a book about himself, and he confessed in that book, but he said that he only bet for the Reds to win. Now, one question people might have is, do former athletes gamble more than current athletes? And if so, is it because they miss that feeling of competing, and gambling is almost a way of competing in some way? Well, there's another study done looking at who is more likely to gamble, former, current, or non-athletes. They took 300 people from Colorado and Connecticut. They tested for former athletes, so anyone who did varsity, high school, or college sports, and they could be out of sports for any amount of time. Non-athletes, people who never played competitive sports, and current athletes who have had to play varsity, high school, or college sports and are currently in a competitive sport. And the results found that former athletes had the highest average score. And in terms of who's most likely to be a pathological gambler, non-athletes were only at 3%, current athletes were at 7%, and former athletes were all the way up at 13%. Pathological gamblers are those whose life is dominated by gambling. They have an overwhelming urge to gamble despite the consequences. They have a focus on instant gratification, and they lose self-control. It's also interesting to note that former athletes bet more on sports gambling and poker, but when it came to slot machines, which is more chance-based, they found no meaningful difference. Now for the #1 gambling sports story, you see this guy right here? Nah, just kidding, that has nothing to do with it. In 1921, there's 8 White Sox players on trial who were accused of accepting illegal bribes and purposely losing the 1919 World Series. In 1919, the White Sox were playing in the World Series against the Cincinnati Reds. That year, the White Sox owner, Charles Comiskey, was making a fortune while the players were unhappy getting paid salaries of an average job at the time. That year, the team payroll was under $100,000, so it was pretty hard for some players to turn down when gamblers offered them $100,000 to purposely play bad in the World Series. The Reds were underdogs in the series, so the gamblers would make more money betting on the White Sox to lose. And rumors started circulating when in Game 1, the top pitcher, Eddie Cicotte, hit the first batter and allowed 5 runs in just 3.2 innings, making the Sox lose Game 1, 9-1. Game 2, purposely losing the game, was a little more secretive, as Lefty Williams was another great pitcher starting for the White Sox. Yes, his first name is actually Lefty, and he also throws left-handed. Lefty allowed 4 runs and 8 innings, but still managed to lose the game. Game 3, things took a bit of a turn when the gamblers only played 1 player so far, and Dickie Keir, who wasn't a part of this gambling, was on the mound for the White Sox, and he allowed 0 runs to score over 9 innings pitched, giving the White Sox a 3-0 win. Game 4, Cicotte was pitching again, and he was doing better until he purposely made some fielding mistakes to lose the game. After that game, some players got partially paid, but following that was Game 5, and it was another blowout for the Reds to win 5-0. Game 6, Dickie Keir clutched up again, giving the White Sox a tight 5-4 win. In Game 7, the Reds made so many errors that the White Sox ended up winning. So the White Sox just won Game 7 of the World Series. Isn't it over? No, because back then, it wasn't best of 7 games, it was best of 9 games. So we head to Game 8. The Reds are still up 4-3 in the series, but could the White Sox accidentally win a World Series? Well, the gamblers did not want that to happen. So the gamblers approached multiple players and threatened them and their families. So entering Game 8, there were some pretty high stakes for them. Lefty Williams got the nod to start that game, and let's just say he did not disappoint. The gamblers. He disappointed all the White Sox fans, but not the gamblers. He pitched .1 innings and allowed 4 runs, throwing the game so bad that they would lose the game and the World Series to the Reds. After the White Sox lost the World Series, more rumors started to spread. However, no investigation was made until 1920, when some other games were being investigated, and a few White Sox players, like Williams and Cicotte, confessed to making deals with gamblers, but they still refused to admit to throwing the World Series. Later in October, 8 White Sox players were charged with conspiracy to defraud. Trial was held in summer of 1921. One gambler claimed that the White Sox players accepted the bribes and lost the World Series on purpose. Debate broke out for hours. Eventually, the court declared that nobody was guilty, but still 8 White Sox players were banned for life in the MLB. Some thought the franchise was cursed since they didn't win a World Series till 2005. Now, why would pro athletes risk their career gambling, especially in more recent years when they're making hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, having their dream job? Well, it might start like this. You gamble and you win big. Big reason people return to gambling is because they win big at first. Their satisfaction is short though, and they want to keep going, and they need more and more to get excited, which leads to them betting more. They think it's a good way to make money, and they're gonna win every time. Next, they lose, and they borrow money, but they use that money to try and break even and pay back the debt. They hide their addiction, they lose their self-control, and they risk their job and family. And finally, they separate themselves from others and feel alone. They lose their job, they get into big debt, they're stressed, they're depressed, they feel helpless, they feel guilty, and they might even commit crimes. Now, those were the stages of becoming a pathological gambler. Pathological gamblers, their life is controlled by gambling. They have an overwhelming urge to gamble despite the consequences. Their focus is on instant gratification, and they lose self-control. Some solutions pathological gamblers might think of is substance use, jail, suicide, getting killed by the creditors, but hopefully they choose the last one, which is getting help. So why do pro athletes risk their career gambling? Well, in short, it's because they could be addicted.